1 second. Oh gosh. All right, good. I need to get this here so that we, oh my heavens. Okay, 1 second, please. Okay, I'm just finding the places, what's happening, and then we'll make the bracha. Okay, just so that when I want to go to screen share, we'll go right to it. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So now we are going to actually go right ahead with this. So we actually looked at this, right? We looked at the fact that Moses, I can go over this one more time. Vayitzav Moshe v'ziknei Yisrael et ha'am lemor. Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, Shamor et kol hamitzvah, observe, guard, right? This entire mitzvah, asher anochi metzaveh etchem hayom, which I command you today. V'haya bayom hasher ta'avru et hayarden, and it shall be that on the day that you cross over the Jordan, el haaretz, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, v'hakemota lacha avenim gdolot, you shall set up large stones, v'sadata otam besid, and you shall plaster them with lime. We did the Rashi on the first verse, so I'm going to go right to the second verse. Right, you shall set up. This is actually a very interesting Rashi because it's not something that you easily get from the text, as you'll see, right? So you shall set up for yourselves by Yarden in the Jordan River, v'achar kach, and after that, totziu misham acherot, take out, in other words, carve out other stones, v'tivnu mehem mizbeach bahar eval, and from those stones build an altar on Mount Eval. Nimtzeit ata omer shlosha mine avanim hayu. So from all of this, you can derive that there were 3 types of stones, not necessarily different, granite, marble, or something. It's not that what I think it's talking about. I think it's talking about stones for a particular purpose. Shtei Misrei b'Yarden, 12 in the Jordan, ukenegdan begalgal, and again to correspond to them in Gilgal, ukenegdan bahar Eval, and again corresponding to them on Mount Eval, kedeita b'mesechet Sota, as we find in the tractate Sota. So this commandment that we're reading about actually had 2 more occurrences of this similar setting up these large stones, and to be able to put on them the words that he's going to refer to in a moment, right? So here we go. V'chatavta alehem, and you shall inscribe on them, you shall write on them, et kol divrei haTorah hazot ba'ovrecha, and you shall write upon them all the words of this Torah as you cross over. Leman, in order that asher Tavo el haaretz, you shall come into the land, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha. Notice, by the way, the repetition of this idea, right? Which the Lord your God is giving to you. And again, I think the emphasis, right? The fact that this is repeated so many times, at least twice that we've identified right now, is to understand that we are not simply entitled to it. It is something that God is giving us, and we should recognize how this ultimately, how the land of Israel is something that comes from a divine source, right? We ourselves don't have ownership. We only have it because God has given it to us. And that creates, of course, a whole dynamic of how you live in that land, the kind of life you're supposed to have in that land. And clearly, right, starts all off from a sense of appreciation, right? That the Torah is trying to build in us that sense of appreciation. Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. And my understanding, of course, is that it is a metaphor, right? So chalav has to do with like cream, right? That kind of thing. But also perhaps, I don't know if back then they saw milk as being like a complete food or something like the physical food. Dvash, sweetness, right? And not just existence, but a sweet existence, a lovely existence. Ka'asher dibar Hashem Eloheh avotecha alach. As the Lord, as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, fathers, patriarchs, spoke to you, or spoke about you, something like that.
No Rashi until 8.
Okay, so I actually have, I'm looking to see, let me see, maybe back here, I had a Torah T'mimah. Maybe it's on the next page, because it says the words of this Torah. So let me keep going. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we'll keep going, because that Torah T'mimah refers to the next verse, and we'll go to this here. All right. So, okay. Uvanita sham mizbeach, and you shall build there an altar, right? Remember, Rashi made a reference to that, right? L'Hashem Elokecha, to the Lord your God. Mizbach avanim, an altar of stones. Lo tanif alehem barzel, you shall not wield upon them, the stones, right? Iron, metal, because metal, of course, as I'm sure you all know, is symbolic of war. So interesting, right? To maybe meditate a little bit about the significance of the fact that the altar cannot have any implication of warfare, right? Of human beings attacking each other, killing each other. So specifically, it's about warfare. It doesn't look like there's Rashi on that either, right? Avanim shleimot tivneh. So just to make this even clearer, the Torah says this in a different way. Whole shleimot, whole stones you shall build, or with whole stones you shall build, right? I'm just putting in some words there. Et mizbach Hashem Elokecha, the altar of the Lord your God. And I'm wondering, even though we're talking about this particular altar, I'm wondering if this is referring to any stone altar, that this repetition is the suggestion that whenever a stone altar was to be built, you weren't to put metal to carve the stones in any way. Ve'ha'alita alav ulot l'Hashem Elokecha, and you shall place upon it, take up ulot, right, whole offerings to the Lord your God, dedicated to the Lord your God. So we can, again, sort of standing back a little bit, what's going on here, right? We're talking about the Torah, right? The words of the Torah on stone, right? What's the significance, right? That they're on stone, and the symbolism of stone, right? And then this altar giving whole offerings to God. There's a tremendous amount of gratitude, all part of it put together, right? As to how we carry this in our hearts, right? And can today. V'zavachta shlamim, and you shall also slaughter, right? Shlamim, peace offerings, if we want to call it that. V'achalta sham, and there you shall eat, because we know with olot, the only part of it that isn't burned totally is the hide of the animal. I've mentioned this a number of times now, which went to the priest who brought the offering, but otherwise none of it was consumed by human beings. However, with shlamim, and one of the reasons they're called shlamim is because part of it went on the altar, part of it went to the priests, was consumed by priests, and part of it went to the family that brought it, so that everybody had a part of it. And that's the kind of shleimut we're talking about, right? We talk about the meaning of peace being wholeness. Wholeness. That's, again, the very dynamic going on here is something to meditate a little bit about. There's a lot, actually, to think about. The samachta, and you shall rejoice, lifnei Hashem Elokecha, before the Lord your God, right? So what are we looking for, right? The gratitude, the recognition, the sense of what we're being given, the gift that we're being given is supposed to, again, elicit joy within our hearts. V'chatavta alahem, and now going back to these stones, you shall inscribe, you shall write on these stones, on the stones, et kol divrei haTorah hazot, all the words of this Torah, ba'er hei'tev, in a clear explanation, I suppose I might translate it. So Rashi does talk about, what do we mean? What's this additional phrase here, ba'er hei'tev? And look at what Rashi says. If you're not familiar with this, you might be surprised. Ba'er hei'tev, b'shiv'im lashon, in 70 languages, right? Traditionally, all the languages of the world, because there were 70 nations that came from Noah, that descended from Noah, in that next generation or two, there are 70 nations. Remember, God divided into 70 tongues, right? Because at one point they were all talking the same language, and then because they tried to create the Tower of Babel, God broke them up into 70 different languages. So, in other words, it should be well understood in 70 languages. And Torah T'mimah has, I think, a really cool discussion about it. So he quotes this, he quotes the Sota passage. This comes also, Rashi says, Sham, Ibid, right? In also that Sota passage, page 32a, right? B'shivim lashon. And here's what he has to say. Let's see. Okay. HaMefarshim parshu betam hadavar. So betam hadavar. So the interpreters, the Torah, the Bible interpreters explained in explaining what was going on here, tam hadavar, the reason for this, kedei shiavinu kol ha'umot, that all the nations should be able to understand, ve'yed'u ma shekatuv b'Torah, so that they would also know what was written in the Torah. That's something lovely, and it parallels the idea that when God originally appeared at Mount Sinai, he actually went to all the nations to offer them the Torah. And again, I actually want to sense that we're not necessarily talking about the specific Torah that we refer to as Torah and the words in the Torah scroll, but the whole idea of Torah as meaning learning, right? Or teaching, capital T, sorry. Mishnah has the meaning of learning, but Torah has the meaning of teaching, right? It's divine origin. It's coming from the great teacher. The Kfar Tarchu, and already they tried, Amalu, they worked very hard. They tried very, very hard. Hamafarshim, right? Those interpreters, the Faresh Hadavar Kipshuto, to explain this according to its simple meaning. Shahaita kola Torah kula ktuva al ha'avanim, right? That the entire Torah, every bit from Bereshit to Yisrael, right, to Zot HaBracha, from the first word to the last, was written. The entire Torah was written al ha'avanim, on these stones. Mu'uteket b'shiv'im lashon, and also these 70 languages, the entire Torah. So we've got 71 versions of the entire Torah written on these stones, right? Asher zeh davar shelo yishuar. You can't even, can you imagine what these stones had to look like if in fact they had the entire Sefer Torah, all the words of the Sefer Torah written on these stones in 71 versions? How do you calculate that, right? V'lachen karov lomar. So he says in some ways it makes more sense, right? It makes more sense. The rak aseret hadibrot hayu ktuvim alehem. That what we're talking about is the 10 Commandments.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Why do you keep saying 71 instead of 70?
Well, I guess because I thought there were maybe it was 70. I'm thinking of Hebrew and another 70 languages. That's why I'm saying 71.
That's
So
what I thought maybe, but it only says 70, so
right.
I
Yeah,
wasn't sure.
yeah, but and maybe that's what it means. There's a question of whether the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, was 70 or 71. So it would have an odd number. Okay. But either way, we're still talking about a huge number of translations of the Torah written on these stones. And he says, you can't even calculate what we're looking at, right? And he's come to the conclusion that we must really be talking about, when it says Kol Torah, that we're really talking about the 10 Commandments. Ukesamach ra'aya l'davar. And he says he has something of a proof, right? He's not saying it's compelling, but he says it's supportive, right? There's a supportive proof to this. If shar lahasmich milashon, that one can actually bring this to bear, milashon et divrei haTorah, right? From the language that they use in the verse, et divrei haTorah, at the words of the Torah, that it uses this divrei haTorah. Ve'im haita hakavana al kol haTorah, and were this verse really talking about the entire Torah, lo hava le'lemar, it wouldn't have needed to say et divrei. It wouldn't have needed to use the term divrei. That this word divrei would be unnecessary if it was referring to the entire Torah. It would have just said ela et haTorah. It just would have said the Torah. Write the Torah on the 70 stones and on the 12 stones and 70 languages. Right? Don't need the word divrei. Uchamo beperek vayelech, and likewise Parshat Vayelech, in the Parsha coming up, by the way, of Vayelech, Vayichtov Moshe et haTorah. It doesn't say divrei haTorah. Moses wrote the Torah, meaning the entire Torah. So he's saying the language itself lends credence to the idea that we're just talking about the 10 Commandments. Uve'echad ha'amarim shekatavnu v'chikrei lashon hakodesh. And he says in one of the articles that we wrote, referring, of course, to himself, right, in examining, right, in researching out lashon hakodesh, Hebrew, the Hebrew language, Safa LaNe'emanim. This is the name of the book that he wrote. Again, the amount of work that these people did, that Baruch haLevi Epstein did, is just staggering as far as I'm concerned. The output, right? The book is called Safa LaNe'emanim, Language for the Faithful. And it's in Varsha. It was published in Warsaw, and this is 5653. In other words, back in 1892, I think is that's the corresponding year. Katavnu, we wrote, Bichlal inyan drasha zo, we wrote in regards to this particular interpretation, this drash, ra'ayon muskal, an informed proof. Okay, so point made. Omnam, however, lulei divrei hamafarshim, right? Given the words of the interpreters, haya efshar lefaresh lashon b'shivin lashon. One could interpret or explain this terminology in 70 languages, lo kamo sheregilim lefaresh, not as it is customarily explained, b'shivim safot, referring to 70 tongues, right? 70 languages. Ela kamo shepirshu b'zohar, but rather, look at this. He's referring now to the Zohar, right? As is explained in the Zohar, and here's the reference, Leviticus and 270, paragraph 200, 270, excuse me. I'm trying to figure out what this is, because this is 270 and 40. So is he talking about 311? I'm not sure, unless it's an abbreviation for something. And kaf, this is page 20. So maybe, oh, I know what it means now, just figured it out. Raya mehemna. In other words, it's a part of the Zohar that's called the faithful shepherd, I believe, right? And it's on page 20. Forgive me, just took me a while to connect. Ma shekatuv shehasanhedrin hayu yodim b'shivim lashon. In referring to how the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, were knowledgeable in 70 languages. Upirshu, and there they explain, the inun shiv'in panin la Torah, that what we're referring to is the 70 faces of the Torah. In other words, the 70 ways in which one can take the verses of the Torah and think them through. And of course, you've now had some experience of how you can look at the words of the Torah and you can mine out various approaches to it and various levels of information. Uve'emet, and in truth, sham mukhrach lefaresh chayin. There, one has to explain it in that way. Depshuto lo yitachen, because you can't explain it in its simple terms, that is, that the Sanhedrin knew 70 different languages. But gam hacha, and so here too, itparesh chen, we can explain it the same way. V'yitba'er me'od halashon, ba'er hei'tev. Okay, and so it becomes clearly understood, this terminology that the Torah uses of ba'er hei'tev, a very good explanation. Shenit ba'ara haTorah, okay, that the Torah was to be understood, so that the Torah would be understood, mikol panim umikol sad, from every way, from both, from every, literally it means from every face or every surface, umikol sad, and from every side. So I think he's talking about whether literally or figuratively or metaphorically, this is the way one needed to look at the Torah. That's what the hope was. Uve'emet b'lashon Chazal, and quite honestly, when Chazal, right, our sages of blessed memory, in the language that they used, Ragil lavo Hashem lashon, very often the noun lashon, right, which means tongue literally, right? So we think of it as language, but movan ofan, it means ofan, a manner, v'derech, and a way. So that you don't translate the word lashon when you come across rabbinic material very often. What they mean is, when they say lashon, they don't mean language, they mean way, right? Manner. Kamo lishna bishna, right? So, for example, lishna bishna would be understood to mean in a derogatory kind of way. Lishna kama, or the expression, the original expression. Lishna batra, the lost expression. Shepirushan, so we can explain each one, right? Ofan ra, a negative way, a wicked way. Ofan, a way, rishon, the first way. Over ofan hasheni, and the second way. Ukahena harbe. And there are many examples of this in Chazal, in Ma'marei Chazal, in the words that we find in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash, etc., etc. And this is where I'm going to stop for now until next time. So, okay, let's see something here. Okay. Very good. We'll just stop here. I'll stop the share and give you a chance to comment or share whatever your thoughts are before I stop the recording. So any comments, any thoughts? Did you enjoy this? Tell me. Wow. Silence, stunned silence. Okay, let me stop the
The only
recording.
comment I have, Rabbi, is that when I was younger, I was so busy following success. I wanted success so badly that I didn't enjoy life like I should. A good book, planting flowers, smelling the flowers, going to the movies, reading Torah. I was too busy following success, and that's wrong. But that was what I was doing.
So I wouldn't be so harsh. I think you were defining success in a different way. And I think a lot of people, every individual has their own way of defining success. And possibly, you needed to provide for your family and you wanted to do it in the best possible way. I'm not trying to whitewash everything, but people define success usually in a more financial or physical kind of way. But look at this, Harlan. God has spared you all these years, and now you're studying Torah and you're appreciating it in a way. We're here. If we were perfect, I've said this many times, right? If we didn't have anything to learn, if we didn't need to make changes in our lives, then we wouldn't be created at all. The very reason we're here is so that we can learn from our mistakes. And, my definition of experience is making mistakes. That's why companies want someone with experience, because they don't want you making those mistakes on their money. So at any rate, thanks for sharing that. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording.